A few months ago, Halo 5 finally appeared after a brutally long public relations cycle, and after making my way through the game a couple of times, I've been trying to work out why I have so much friction with the way that the game's story is told to me. We could call that narrative design, and I'm going to for the rest of this video. What I want to do here is speedily move through some of the things that Halo 5 is doing on the narrative front while analyzing how it does those things. This isn't me hollering about why Halo 5 is a ripoff or delivering a top 10 list of the most garbo things I can think of to spew about the game. Instead, it's just an attempt to talk about friction on narrative design, why I think it's happening, and what the game does to try to work around that friction. The first friction has to do with how the game's story is communicated to the player. Halo has always been about its large, cinematic moments, and Halo 5 really wants to use its newfangled technological abilities to facilitate a new kind of story unlike any other, with brand-name facial recognition that can hook players into engagement with characters that they might be unfamiliar with. There seems to really be an investment in that mode too, since there's an awful lot of downtime moments where Team Osiris, led by Locke, stands around in a cinematic and talks about the things that would probably have been told to us in voiceover narration in previous games. And quote-unquote cinematic is critical here because in the previous iterations of these games, you got the feeling that three people standing around a weird 3D model in the middle of a glowing table was a way of delivering exposition in a technologically cheap way while loading the next level. In Halo 5 it seems like we're supposed to linger on these uncanny valley faces, like I'm supposed to be super impressed that they even exist on my television. The idea that the story I'm getting is also functionally a hardware promotional piece really detracts from the whole experience, and I feel like I'm supposed to be more wowed by a bald head than I am with what's actually going on between the characters I'm investing emotional energy in. I mean, we're meant to clearly recognize Nathan Fillion, but what's the payoff? He's not being delivered for his acting here. He's a comedic leading man in nearly everything, but here he's reduced to quipping every now and again during the action sequences of the gameplay. I get the feeling that the only reason for ever having him speak without his helmet on is to be able to easily cut him into trailers. Cynthia K. McWilliams seems to function in a similar way, but with a little bit less immediate facial recognition. The second narrative friction is that there's not a strong sense of when something important is happening versus when something quotidian is happening. I would never have thought that I would say that about the audio cue-loving Halo series, but my lack of understanding what's important or not is something that's unique to this game in particular. When Halo 5 goes hard for setting tone with the tableau of the widescreen image, it works super well. The stakes of the run-up to the final battles of the game are very clear about what's going down. The galaxy is getting taken over, and Locke is the only person who can get the person who could stop this. The wide horizons with clear movement set the tone and my expectations about what is coming down the pipeline. However, it's in the micro that the game grinds to a halt when it comes to giving me narrative chunks that I can understand in a clear way. Halo has such an extensive amount of backstory that I'm not quite sure what is being brushed off because I should know it versus what is being brushed off because it's unimportant. When Locke and the Arbiter have a weird standoff, it's pretty clear that I'm supposed to get that they're not bros, but the stakes of that anti-brodom are very unclear. Is their standoffishness important? When the Arbiter congratulates Locke afterward and the game suggests that the Arbiter is being respectful, is that really important? And is he being respectful to Locke or to the Master Chief? What this really brings to mind is the dynamics of something like The Lord of the Rings, where a single exchange in one of the books can be traced across the fiction history to have extreme resonances. For a passerby, it's just a sentence that gets glossed over, and the filmed adaptations of those books were very smart to avoid translating textual, fictional history reference into a medium that might collapse under the weight of that past. Halo 5 seems to want to go the other way. It buries almost every interaction with a reference to some over there that a casual fan like myself doesn't know about. Unlike The Lord of the Rings, I can't just skim over it. Halo 5 lingers on its transmedia encyclopedia, and I just end up confused and unhappy when I'm pausing the game during the next level in order to wiki the sequence of events that were referenced by the major players in the game during that last cutscene. When I'm saving the Arbiter with the Swords of St. Helios or fighting the Eternal Warden, I get the feeling that what was explained as important 5 seconds ago is actually pretty banal in the game proper. The Cryptum, or whatever piece or object is really needed right now, could have 3 books dedicated to it, or it could be something that disappears in 10 seconds. There's no way for me to know in the moment, and I find that distressing. It causes the stakes of the action to not so much rise throughout the game, as much as dawdle upward toward a plateau of screaming at me to take out the anti-air guns and the newly summoned Forerunner Knights. It makes the ending, and my god what an ending, seem like such a practical joke that will get replaced by an end-of-credit stinger. The Guardians are summoned, which I know is important because I'm told that it is, and then the Master Chief is released from prison, and the game ends on the ultimate anticlimactic sequel hook. The game itself suggests that some of the things I did, or maybe even most of the things I did, short of the rote causal actions, were unimportant because Cortana's basic plan is still going to happen no matter what. The Guardians get teleported, and the credits roll. I have no way of gauging the stakes of any of this. Now, I've been guilty myself of creating games with false choice, and I think if Halo 5 did the work of meditating on why the actions that you performed did not matter in the end, it might have been able to say something at least semi-profound about our expectations for contemporary blockbuster shooters. This final scenario of the game lends to the third friction. It feels like the entirety of Guardians was mop-up duty for a series of events that took place off-screen. The sheer number of narrative dependencies that the game has once again puts it in the Lord of the Rings territory, and it seems like it would have been much simpler to evacuate some of that story in order to replace it with a tighter and cleaner tale about Fireteam Osiris running around the galaxy trying to find out what the Master Chief was into. We can imagine a game where the protagonists do not have to meet every named character in the series' history who still happens to be alive. Osiris constantly reaches sites too late to find the Master Chief, and have to mop up behind him all the way across the galaxy. In order to appease all of that narrative dependency going back a full decade, the developers made the choice to split the game into two separate narrative threads, and skipping back and forth has a unique anticlimactic feeling. There are a few times in the game where a Master Chief mission is immediately followed by a Locke mission, in which Fireteam Osiris spends the first few minutes recapping what we just learned from Blue Team's exploits. It is not fun to follow the conclusions of another character around the game. At the end of things, I think that the developers and writers of Halo 5 certainly had different plans for the shape of this game. The cut-off ending feels more like a mandate from on high that secures interest in a sequel than it does a decision made on the ground, and I'm sure that the conclusion of this plotline over the next couple games will be incredibly exciting.